Hello, this is Soundout here, and today we'll be discussing my top 12 best movies of the year.
It's morphin' time!
So you might be wondering, why top 12 and not top 10? Well, I am Soundout12. That's the only reason I got, but I wanted to highlight the 12 movies that made the most impact on me, either emotionally, or just from a fan perspective, or just because I'm a film nerd and I like camera stuff, or because I'm a nerd and I like geek stuff. It all depends. Every one of these movies is on the list for a specific reason, and I think the list is going to be more about why they're on the list as opposed to just the movies themselves. So I'll be curious to see what your lists are down below, but here is mine and I hope you enjoy. Number 12, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. So this movie is one that I put on the list because when I talked about being a huge nerd, this is what I was talking about, because this movie isn't necessarily great in its artistic value or its cinematography or anything, but it's really damn fun because I'm a huge fan of Venom and the symbiotes and Carnage, and I really like Tom Hardy, so it all kind of like rolls together, you know? So Tom Hardy's Venom has been such a joy and delight for the last 3 years, because the first Venom film I really enjoyed because of the dynamic between Eddie Brock and Venom in the film, and this gives me more of that and throws in Woody Harrelson as Carnage and Naomi Harris as Shriek. It's a winning package for me on a personal level just because these are actors I like in roles that I appreciate from other material. So when it comes down to it, I don't know if it's the greatest film ever made, and it absolutely isn't. It's my number 12, but it's so much fun and I really enjoy it. And I'm really appreciating the fact that it's like an old school PG-13, not like a new school PG-13. Because boy, a lot of people get eaten. Anyways, so honestly, I really did appreciate the movie for what it did, and it made the list because of all those reasons I just stated. Number 11, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie kind of restored my faith in MCU solo movies. After a year that had WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, solo MCU projects as movies didn't really excite me, especially after Black Widow, which I found to be a massive disappointment. But Shang-Chi did show me that, yes, Marvel can still do solo movies and do them well. One of the things in particular that really struck me about this movie is it had a lot of scale and scope, more so than the Disney Plus shows could provide, but it still had a lot of great storytelling and character work, which the Disney Plus shows excelled at. So I liked the balance of the two. But the thing that really ties this movie together is its martial arts choreography, because the action sequences in this film are not only choreographed well, they're shot well. And that's a big difference as opposed to the rest of the industry. There is a lot of directors who are action directors that don't get any say into how the camera is moved. Whereas here, you had that meshing of the two worlds. The camera and the stunt choreographer were working together. So you had stunt coordination, camera work, working together as opposed to being opposing forces, making this film really vibrant and really fun to watch, in addition to going down some darker roads than I expected from a Disney Marvel film. So it's on the list, and I definitely enjoyed it. I've probably already watched it like 3 times this year. It's a treat. I really think Shang-Chi is something special, and I look forward to future movies with these characters. Number 10. No Time to Die. So this is the long-awaited next James Bond film, and it's been a long time coming. Spectre came out in 2015. No Time to Die finally came out in 2021, and this is Daniel Craig's, he said it before the movie came out, this is my last Bond movie. And it really was good. And it's good in the sense that it tied together all the elements of the previous Daniel Craig Bond films, minus Quantum of Solace. They forgot that one existed, and good on you, because I want to forget Quantum of Solace existed. That was the worst Bond movie I've ever seen. When it comes down to it, they brought in elements of Casino Royale, elements of Skyfall, elements of Spectre, and kind of really gave this version of Bond a send-off, where I think the previous versions of Bond really never got that. And Daniel Craig came in and had like this specific type of storyline where it showed kind of his origin to be 007, and this showed his retirement from 007, which happens very much in the beginning of the movie and leading off of events from Spectre. So the whole thing comes together as kind of a finale piece for this iteration of James Bond, and I think that was really special and unique in a franchise that has changed actors without even blinking. So I really thought that No Time to Die came together quite well, and its ending is especially impactful, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone that hasn't seen it if they want to. Number 9, In the Heights. In the Heights is a film based off of a Broadway musical, and a lot of the times adaptations of Broadway musicals can get a little stale. And it's not to say that they're not bad, it's just that sometimes something that works on the stage doesn't work in a film. This film worked itself well in adapting to Broadway, but not as well as I think some others have had, but I still wanted to include it on this list because I think the story of In the Heights, as well as its representation for Latina people, is actually really, really important in the overall landscape of film. And in addition to that, it resonated with me on a personal level with some of the character stories, especially discussing, do you want to stay and live where you've always grown up, where everyone you know is, or do you want to go off somewhere vast and grand to something new and exciting? And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking nowadays that wasn't asked before. It was always expected that you'd move away from your hometown and find better things otherwise. A lot lately, I've noticed that, not many stories are told from the perspective of what if you stay where the people you love are? And I think that's kind of something that resonated with me a lot, and that's why the movie ends up on this list. I don't know if it's necessarily as well made as some other films on the list, and I think it did have the chance to do more with its dance choreography and its musical numbers, but the overall story and narrative really came together in a way that resonated with me. And I think sometimes that's more important than necessarily the film itself, but how it makes you feel. Number 8. Encanto. Encanto is the most recent Disney animated movie, and yet another movie on this list with Lin-Manuel Miranda music, which honestly, the guy's a genius. But Encanto was really fantastic for me because I think that, again, when I'm looking at movies, I look at kind of like similar story structures. I've seen so many at this point. A lot of Disney movies are about like going off on a grand adventure, finding your own destiny out there somewhere. But Encanto was the story of a girl and a family and trying to save the family and save the family home. So it stayed very centralized, but that didn't limit the film's broad scope, as its musical numbers took the film to brand new and exciting places in wonderful musical montages in a really creative way. And at the end of the day, I think its storytelling is really important, especially for the community it's representing. Honestly, I, again, really like the music, the animation was gorgeous, and the overall story did kind of resonate with me, and it reminded me of some stories from my own families, but of other families of friends that I know. So I think Encanto was a beautiful presentation with wonderful music and an overall different kind of story than what Disney usually tells. And for that, it earns its spot on this list. Number 7, Ghostbusters Afterlife. Now, this is a film that was something I wasn't initially as excited about as I ended up becoming. Originally, we heard, okay, they're doing another Ghostbusters movie. And after 2016's film, I think that there was a lot of reservation from a lot of Ghostbusters fans, especially fans of the original films. And I think that Afterlife is a good movie to pay tribute to the style and the feel of the original 2 Ghostbusters films, while also continuing that story and that world forward in a kind of different way. At times, it does nostalgia bait a little too much, but it introduced new characters that I ended up really liking, and overall presented a new Ghostbusters story in the spirit and feel of the originals. So in a way, it continued the franchise legacy by passing the baton, less so than trying to recreate the baton. I really do appreciate that. Plus, the ending of the film sets up future Ghostbusters stories that I hope we'll get to see, because it'd be very, very exciting. So Ghostbusters Afterlife, for me, ended up being one of my favorite films of the year. Number 6. Cruella. Cruella is an interesting movie, because personally speaking, I don't really like the live-action Disney remake trend. The idea of, oh hey look, we took The Lion King and then we made it realistic. It doesn't excite me that much. But the things I've enjoyed when Disney does these live-action remakes is things like Cruella or Maleficent, changing the story. It's such a simple thing, but they did this with Maleficent and I thought they did it well. They did the story of Sleeping Beauty from Maleficent's point of view. Changed her from, straight up villain to kind of an anti-hero and a tragic character. With Cruella, they kept her a villain, and they sort of made a prequel to a 101 Dalmatians story we haven't seen. But the way they did it was really clever. Setting it in the punk rock era of London in the 70s, having a kick-ass score, which, hey, music is always going to get me. The soundtrack for this is incredible because it brings together all these different elements and ties together songs we know with some we may not know as well, with scenes to convey the emotions and feelings. The set design is really impressive, the costume work is incredible, and the acting performance from Emma Stone as Cruella is amazing. In addition to that, they subverted a lot of the tropes that we see in films like this and kind of went for a different approach. And so I like the differences, and I also like the setting. So overall, while I don't know if it's better than some of the movies that were lower on the list, I think that it was really fun to watch, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm really captivated by the world they created. And so I hope that with a sequel, we're going to get a different version of the 101 Dalmatians story than we got before, as opposed to just remaking it. Because I think that setting up a new world and a new setting like this was really cool, and the fact that Cruella was still quite evil made me very, very happy. And the last thing about Cruella in terms of the world building is that when I got to see Cruella at Oogie Boogie Bash at Disneyland this year, the display they had there, her whole setup, the music, the lights, the costumes, it just brought me right back into the world that that movie had set up. And I just think that's a really powerful thing when a film can set up a world where you really don't want to leave. And I really didn't want to leave, but I had to move along because that's where the line was going. Number 5, Dune. Remember when I said there was that like film school art house kind of vibe in my head? That's where Dune comes out. But it's also a giant nerd thing because I hadn't really absorbed anything related to Dune until this year. Arrow Video's 4K the original Dune was how I watched the original film for the first time. And I wanted to see it prior to this new version. And I gotta say, Denis Villeneuve's directed Dune Part 1 was really frickin' great. It's amazing to see a movie on this scale for a sci-fi film and to keep to that very much core version of Dune where it is that more cerebral, more slower paced type of film. Because I think the original Dune has wacky pacing. The first half is kind of slow and building things up, and the second half blows through the entire rest of the book so quickly, you have no idea what happens. With Dune Part 1, it adapts half of the first book, and it takes its time, it builds its world, it sets up its story and characters. And it was so visually grabbing that I never thought that a movie that was filled with sand and dirt would be so visually interesting, but it was. And I gotta say that I really, really was impressed by just how they approached this. They took elements of the visual design from the original film in very minute ways, so it was kind of a reference, but it did seem to kind of stick closer to the book. I haven't read the book, but I could feel there was more depth to this, more intrigue. And so it got me wrapped up into the world of Dune once again, but I think in a more successful way than the previous film adaptation had been. So I'm really looking forward to Dune Part 2, and I hope it delivers just like this one did, because this was quite an event film, and I gotta say, I'm really, really impressed. Number 4, Zack Snyder's Justice League. So this is kind of a funny story. I wasn't part of the initial crowd that was like, oh, release the Snyder Cut, because honestly, when it comes down to it, I don't ask for director's cuts of movies if I've not seen said director's cut. There is very much many a time when you get a director's cut of something and you're like, oh, wait, that was not as good as we had before. What happened? But, you know, I said to myself, if they were to release the fabled Snyder Cut of Justice League, I'd totally watch it. And I did, and I loved it. This was quite spectacular, because I think that just like with Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition Director's Cut is categorically better than the theatrical version. With Zack Snyder's Justice League, I literally tossed the discs for the theatrical version of Justice League into a box, never to be seen again. Because the way that they took what was a movie that explored the concept of hope, the concept of tragedy, one that gave each individual character their own storyline to be built up throughout the course of the film, to take interesting, intriguing visual work, to have a wide variety of characters representing different ethnicities and genders, and representing them well with equal parts, to then cut all the good stuff out and then just plop out whatever the heck the theatrical Justice League was by taking only like 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the original Justice League film and then just putting out a bunch of stuff with Joss Whedon's direction that just turned out so terrible and didn't match the rest of it and made this horrible, chaotic mess that was theatrical Justice League. Be gone with that, because I'm really glad this happened. Because even if it's never going to continue, the way the film actually turned out, it was visually interesting. It was gripping emotionally in a way that I didn't anticipate. And I found myself sitting through what was a 4-hour movie wanting more, because I was so engaged in this world. It made everything that was weird about Batman v Superman worth it. It was everything that was about Man of Steel worth it. It made a trilogy. It completed a story while setting up other stories that we may never see. But for me, that doesn't matter, because I think that the end product, while Personally, I may trim some stuff out of it. I could have cut it down to 3.5 hours. That's just coming from an editing standpoint. I think that what was being told here was actually really something special, and I'm really glad it came to exist because this ended up being one of my favorite DC movies of all time, but also one of my favorite movies of the year. Number 3, Tick, Tick, Boom. This was a film released to Netflix that was directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, because that guy's just having a year that's vibing with me, apparently. Starring Andrew Garfield, who is playing a real person in a fictionalized sense told by the real person. This is the story of musical theater playwright Jonathan Larson, who wrote a musical theater play about his life. So it's sort of a fictionalized version of someone's life, but the way that this movie was constructed and the way that this story was presented has been sitting with me since I've seen it, and I haven't been able to shake it out of my head yet. And that's why it's at number 3. You'll see why the top 2 are the top 2 in a moment, but this is why it's number 3. This is a story about a man who is approaching his 30th birthday, trying to get a play onto Broadway. He's trying to write this thing that's supposed to be his legacy before he's 30, because all these other great creatives made it before they're 30. And in a lot of ways, I sort of resonated with that on a really deep level, especially with how I've been doing this YouTube channel for 12 years. I sometimes look at the other people that have been doing it for shorter and are way more successful. And sometimes I'm like, I gotta get up to that. I gotta get up to that level. And I get into this like furious creative mode and I'm trying to push. But the moral of the story was not that you push until you die. The moral of the story was you keep doing what you love because your time on Earth is limited. Your time on Earth is special, and you need to appreciate everything in it and not hyper focus on the one thing that's going to make your entire life worth it, but that you working on it can make your entire life worth it. And so that message is what came across to me. In addition to that, as a film nerd, this movie is amazing. It's offsetting 2 different types of storytelling. It's got the dramatic storytelling shot in more traditional dramatic ways, but it has the backdrop of Jonathan Larson telling the story of his life. So putting those 2 elements together added for some insanely good camera work, but insanely good just creative vision onto how to present a musical number. And I don't know how to put it into words. And when I don't know how to put something into words, I know there's something truly special there. So when it comes down to it, it's a movie about someone who is creative, trying to push their creativity to a deadline. And that leads it to a breaking point. And I have done that before, so I know how that feels. So because of that, that is absolutely why this is one of my favorite movies of the year. Because it resonated with me on a very deep level. And on top of that, the music's just great. And you know what? Honestly, I can't recommend it enough. Number 2, Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway. This should come as no surprise, I'm a giant Gundam nerd. I mean, I talk about it a lot on this channel. Even if nobody watches the videos, I'll sometimes make a Gundam video just because I want to make it. But Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway was quite interesting because I think the reason why I put it this high is not just because it's Gundam, but because I find its story fascinating. Because the character of Hathaway is sort of a tragic figure. But he's a tragic figure of his own doing. But in himself being a tragic figure, he's trying to change the world. He says he's doing everything for the better of others. But is he? That's not for him to decide. It's for us, the audience. It takes what is a compelling story and continues to build upon it. The film adaptation of this novel series is really captivating visually. And I'm not talking about mobile suit fights, because honestly, those were kind of the weaker parts of the film, especially the last one. But the way the characters are animated is sort of this floaty, dreamlike space. It puts you into a different feeling. You're not in reality, but you're not in fiction. You're somewhere in between. There's incredibly detailed backdrops where the world itself looks just ripped out of reality. But the characters act in sort of a dreamlike fashion. When you're watching Gundam Hathaway, you're sort of feeling a dream. And that's kind of a compelling thought, especially with the events of the film within. They also do a great job of showing the catastrophic damage that a mobile suit dropping down into a city can cause. And that is something very poignant in a way that Gundam hasn't done quite as well before. Others have attempted it, like F-91 or War in the Pocket, but Hathaway exemplified it. And for that, it's my number 2 of the year. And my number 1 movie of the year, Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home is quite the movie. This is a movie that came out during the global crisis we're currently in and still ran to $1 billion at the box office in like 10 days, even without the help of some of the bigger markets in the world. Why is that? Why do people flock to Spider-Man? Well, I think it's because of the natural appeal of the character. This is a character, Spider-Man, in and of himself, whether he's Peter Parker, Miles Morales, Miguel O'Hara, Gwen Stacy, whichever version of the Spider people you want to put in. They all have this sense of doing what's right, no matter the personal consequence. And that is resonated so hard into this film that, yes, it's got legacy characters. Yes, it's got Doctor Strange doing magic stuff. Yes, it's got crazier, larger-than-life events. But at the central core of this movie is this idea that Spider-Man, whoever he may be, will always do what's right, no matter how much personal cost that takes. And that is exemplified by almost every scene in this movie. In addition to that, it's got magic stuff and multiverse things and a lot of legacy characters, but they're used so effectively because all of these characters that appear in this film do not appear for the sake of fan service so much as for the sake of being a point in the film. I didn't feel like they were just throwing characters in for funsies. They threw them in to serve a purpose, to tell the story. And I really haven't stopped thinking about it for the last 2 weeks since it came out, because this movie, in addition to having just this wonderful, central, powerful, emotional message, also has a ton of great action, amazing music. Michael Giacchino, you're a genius. Don't let anyone tell you different. Just incredible acting, funny moments, dramatic moments, just incredible, powerful stuff. In a way that I don't think any other movie in the MCU quite hit as hard right out the gate. So Spider-Man No Way Home is my #1 movie of the year. But that does not discredit anything else that is on this list, or didn't even make it on this list. But this was quite an interesting year of movies. It was quite an interesting year of events in general. But at the end of the day, I feel like Spider-Man No Way Home felt like my #1 pick. So that does it for my top 12 best movies of the year. That's my personal list, but I'd love to hear yours below in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, hit the like button, hit subscribe and the notification bell to keep up with future uploads. I typically upload just Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but this week I threw out a bonus video on a Thursday, so you never know what might happen. So subscribing, turning on notifications is the best way to do that. And thank you to everyone that already does all that. You all are awesome. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you for your support through this very crazy year. Also, be sure to check out Hero Club at hero-club.com for movie news and more, and also my awesome graphic designer on Twitter at darkclaw643. And until next time, this is Soundout saying goodbye.